Welcome to Formed, where each week we navigate a relevant topic or question through honest conversations. We are three pastors with three different backgrounds on staff together at Irving Bible Church in Irving, Texas. We believe we are constantly being formed in the way of Jesus for the sake of the world, and we hope this podcast helps with that. So let's jump into this week's episode of Formed. Welcome back to another week of Formed. Every week on YouTube, audio. Some of you guys listen on your way to work on Thursday morning. Hopefully you have a good Thursday at work if you listen on your way to work.
Starts off good.
It starts off good for sure.
Hopefully.
Barry's back. He came back
Yes.
last week. So if you missed last week's podcast, hop on there, hear a little bit about his sabbatical. And I don't know, maybe you're heading to work and you're like, man, I really need a break. And last week's episode's for you.
There you go.
That could be your sign. But this week we're talking about worry and / surrender. And I was going to read this quote. I think you actually said on last week's podcast, but you mentioned this past week in a message too from the great Dallas Willard. He said, "Whatever you continue to worry about is the clearest indication of what you have yet to surrender to God." And why that quote? Why did you focus on that quote? Why did you mention that quote? Why is that impactful?
Yeah, well, so that was really at the very beginning of my sabbatical. I came across that line, and part of what made it so significant for me is because I found myself in this place where I was just feeling a sense of worry. I was feeling kind of this simmering anxiety at the beginning of this 3-month break. So here I am. I'm given an opportunity to sort of step away from work and to get some rest, and yet kind of all I could think about was work. Mm-hmm. And I found myself feeling this sense of worry about what I was leaving behind. And I came across that line, and it just like, it's in some ways it feels sort of common sense. It's not like this brilliant, profound insight. And yet it so spoke to my reality. What you continue to worry about is the clearest indication of what you've yet to surrender to God. So for me, it was just confronting the reality that I wasn't living from this place of surrender in terms of my role in leadership at IBC. And it really revealed the degree to which I was kind of clinging to the illusion of control. And so it just felt like this really significant kind of invitation from God to practice surrender. And as I began to sort of really kind of lean into that and process through that and all the implications of that, all this other stuff sort of started kind of bubbling up that I was feeling this sense of worry about, and friends and family and all kinds of situations that were just like, okay, here's an invitation once again to practice surrender. And so, that I think that idea of surrender is sort of the central theme of what God's been kind of working with me about over the course of the last 3 months. And it all comes back to kind of beginning from that place of this little quote that talks about worry and me having to confront the degree of worry that I was sort of holding on to.
Yeah.
Well, only Dallas Willard and Barry know anything about worry. The rest of us don't struggle with that.
I didn't know those are two separate people.
Oh, my.
That's right. That's his alter ego.
I didn't know much about Dallas Willard until I started working at IBC, and I'm like, is he real? Is this like an alternate ego of Barry that he's just?
Oh my, yeah. We could talk more about Dallas and his story at another time, maybe on another podcast. I read the biography over the sabbatical, but Dallas was a philosopher and a teacher on the Christian spiritual life. Passed away about 10 years ago, and just such a profound ability to kind of synthesize the life and teaching of Jesus in ways that really are powerful and impactful. And so, anyway, but. Yeah, worry is something of a universal phenomenon, I think, is part of what you were
alluding
pointing to. Yeah, and you even suggested a title for the episode of The Quicksand of Worry. And boy, I thought, that's a pretty apt metaphor for the ways in which we sort of get trapped and pulled down. Of course, you know, those of us who grew up in the TV in 70s and 80s, we thought quicksand was
Was a
going to be
real
a bigger problem in
We
our lives.
actually worried
right?
about quicksand. Yeah.
It's like, I just want to see it in action somewhere.
Yeah, but I thought the same thing. I thought that really was a good metaphor because what happens is we worry about a situation, a person in our life, a circumstance, and then that leads us to try to control that circumstance, that situation, that person, which then leads us to worry more and sink even further into worry that can often become overwhelming, and we just become overcome by that to the point of it almost can feel like it's taking us out. So I thought that was a really good way to think about it.
What would you, I feel like we hear worry, we hear anxiety, we hear fear. Is this all the same thing, or is there a difference between those three?
Yeah, I think often they're used interchangeably, and I think there are distinctions. So worry is cognitive. It's when your mind dwells on negative thoughts, uncertain outcomes, things, how you're afraid how things are going to work out. It's this repetitive, obsessive sort of pattern of thinking and negative thinking. So it's very much in your mind. It's not in your body. And where it can be problematic is when we get stuck in that place. So we're just churning. You're constantly thinking. You're stuck in that sort of repetitive, obsessive kind of thinking. And so much so that it can sometimes be hard to function. So that's worry. Fear is an emotional and physical response that's very, very natural. So, you're crossing the street, a car comes whizzing by, and you're afraid because you can get hit by the car. There's this bodily reaction, this physical reaction, whether that's your body tenses up or sweating or whatever it is. And it's very natural because there's a present danger, an imminent danger or threat that you're facing. And so you feel fear, and it shows up in your physical body. Then worry and fear combined together are really symptoms of anxiety. So I would say that, and I am not a psychologist by any means. And so I think psychologists can explain this much better than I can, but I think of both of those things as symptoms of anxiety. So there's a cognitive piece, there's a physical bodily reaction. I think the difference is that there isn't a present danger or an imminent danger or threat. It's a perceived threat or a perceived danger. And so it's almost like a response to a false alarm that happens. And I think worry can often be very specific. So I'm worried about this job situation, or I'm worried about this medical test. Whereas anxiety can be much more general and almost, encompasses a lot to areas of your life. It's a little bit how I'd say it.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Yeah, I wrote down in terms of distinguishing, because I think what we have here are three very interrelated kind of concepts. So there is some conceptual overlap, and yet they are distinguishable. I think you did a great job kind of helping us think about the differences. When I was thinking specifically about kind of the differences between worry and anxiety, I wrote down kind of 4 words that I think are kind of some of the primary differences: intensity, duration, location, and response.
Good.
Right. So intensity, worry tends to be a little bit more mild emotional reaction, whereas anxiety can be that more kind of intense sense of emotional distress. Duration, worry tends to be more short-term and oftentimes more specific to a set of circumstances that have me worried. Anxiety tends to be something that's a little bit more long-term or more generalized, more diffuse instead of more specific. Location, as you mentioned, worry tends to be very much in our minds. We think about, right? So it's a kind of fear that we generate with our imagination, whereas that fear can be a response to something that is imminent, something that is right in front of me. Worry tends to be something that I'm thinking about the possibility of happening in the future. So location, worry tends to be more in our minds, whereas anxiety is often manifests in our bodies. We feel that racing heart, that tightness in our chest, sweaty palms, aching stomach. There's all kinds of ways in which anxiety can wind up showing up in our bodies beyond just in our thoughts. And the response, oftentimes worry leads to, okay, problem solving, solution. What can I do about this? Whereas oftentimes anxiety leaves us feeling stuck, feeling that sense of overwhelm.
Right.
Like I'm trapped and can't get out of this sense of dread, this sense of emotional distress.
Yeah, I especially think that's good in terms of the response. Because worry, I'm worried about this test. Well, what am I going to do? I'm going to study for this test. But anxiety feels very paralyzing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what to do, but I'm going to keep churning in my mind, and that's showing up in physical. It's manifesting itself in my body as well. So I think that's really, really good.
I think that's one of the biggest things I've learned over this past year, or past 12 months, has been the effect of anxiety on your body, all the different effects it can have that you just never thought that.
The body keeps the score.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Wait, where'd you get that from? My wife says this all the time, and I don't know. I forget where she gets it
Very,
from.
very smart.
There's a famous book by that title that talks about the effects of trauma and kind of the and so part of becoming more aware of and learning to deal with, to manage our anxiety is becoming aware of when it's showing up in our bodies.
Yeah.
Where is it showing up? How's it showing up? And then that's that opportunity to really explore what's really going on here, right? To try to actually come to a deeper place of self-awareness about what's happening that's generating this feeling that I'm feeling in my chest.
Yeah.
What is it that's happening that's causing my palms to feel sweaty, or whatever that sort of bodily manifestation. Where is it showing up in your body? And then doing some of that exploration of what's really going on here.
Yeah.
Palms are sweaty, knees weak.
Uh-oh.
Well, and I think that's really good, because I used to think about worry and anxiety as just stop worrying, just quit it, stop being anxious. And that was not helpful to me. And now I'm thinking more about it as almost like warning lights in your car.
Yeah.
So when I feel those things, when I'm experiencing those things, when I'm aware of that, what's going on here that I need to pay attention to, instead of just quit it. It's more of an indicator of, something's not right here, and I need to take a look at what's going on. And so it's a helpful thing rather than a bad thing. That's that good. I just cut it out.
That's good.
And there's a relationship with control in that.
Yes.
I found myself, that's when I'm worrying the most, is when I'm out of, I'm not in control of it. Like, can't control a test. I can't control whatever it is. And so, okay, so what's the relationship with worry and our faith?
So the places in my life where I find myself worrying are directly related to the places that I'm trying to control and where I'm not trusting God. And for me, it shows up really subtly, because I think I am trusting God in all these places. But when I find myself worrying, it's because I'm really trying to hold on to things. And I think for me, just the way I'm wired, control is a really big thing. And so I'm trying to control it. I'm trying to fix it. I'm trying to do things out of my own strength or wisdom. And it's directly related to a place where I'm not actually trusting God and trusting in myself, relying on myself. Yeah. So that's how it manifests itself for me.
Yeah. And I think about the refrain that you see throughout Scripture. And I think about even how frequently you hear something to this effect from Jesus himself. Do not be afraid, or do not be anxious. And in one place in the Gospel of John, Jesus, right before his journey to the cross, he says, "Don't let your hearts be troubled." And I remember just always thinking about that, like a little easier said than done. Yeah. Don't let your heart be troubled. Sometimes I feel like my heart is troubled whether I want it to or not, right? But we can, I think, mishear those words if we hear them as scolding.
Yes.
Right? As though your fear is your failure, your fear is sin, your anxiety is, right? And so we feel this sense of shame about feeling afraid, feeling worried, feeling anxious. And those are just profoundly human experiences. And so I don't think that we should hear the voice of Jesus as shaming us in our human experience so much as calming us, offering that sense of reassurance, that sense of presence. I mean, I just think about, I think about even when my kids were little, it's okay. I'm here, right? You don't have to be afraid because I'm here and it's going to be okay. And I think that's how we should hear the words of Jesus. It's okay. I'm here. I'm with you. And I just think about, you're teasing me earlier about my affection for Dallas Willard. I just spent a lot of time reading Dallas Willard on the break, and it was so good for me. But one of the books that I read was a book called Life Without Lack, which was published after Dallas passed away, about kind of his reflections on Psalm 23. And I made a confession to the elders over the time of our elders retreat about Psalm 23. So confession time on the podcast. That I never really liked Psalm 23, right? This most beloved of all Psalms, right? Yeah. And their response was very much the same. But here's the thing. It's not that I didn't like it. It's that I never felt like I could really say it with integrity.
Yeah.
The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. Right. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And that always evoked for me this sense of like, I feel like there's all kind of things that I lack, right? Or there's all kinds of things that I want. And so it wasn't so much the sentiment of the psalm as that it's great for the psalmist to be able to say that. Can I say that with integrity?
Yeah.
And that part of this journey for me was learning to be able to embrace that reality. If I truly do believe the first part of that line, the Lord is my shepherd, right? My protector, my provider, the one who is there with me, watching over me, caring for me, supplying my needs. If I really believe that, then I can say, there's nothing that I really need, right? There's nothing that I lack that I really need. And so it's really an affirmation of trust more than it is a declaration of my lived experience, right? It is, I'm trusting in the reality. And so, right, that brings us back to this invitation, not hearing the words of Jesus as scolding and feeling shame, but rather as invitation, trust me, I'm here, I'm with you. So that even though I walk through the deep, dark valley, I don't have to be afraid because you are with me.
Yeah, and I think that's why surrender is not just this one-time thing. Yeah. It's at least a daily thing, if not a moment by moment thing, because it's this idea of like, I'm going to live without the need for control over the outcomes of my life. And yielding myself to this deep trust in the character of God. And that is something that like every morning I'm waking up and I have to do all over again. And like I said, it could be, oftentimes it's a moment by moment thing where I just have to let go. And when I'm spend time with the Lord in the morning, it's actually a really physical expression of where I know I'm doing this and I've got to God's got to almost pry open my hands and I'm participating in that, saying, okay, Lord, this is yours. John Ortberg has this great prayer that I've in ways co-opted, I think, and I used every morning. And it's just simply this. He says, I can't, you can, I think I'll let you. I love that because it's so simple. And yet, like, so that's this thing I've been praying every morning. I can't, you can, I think I'll let you. I think that really is a beautiful way to express surrender.
Yeah. One thing I'm sort of building into my rule of life coming back from sabbatical is beginning each day with kneeling prayer, the first thing when I get out of bed. And it's just a prayer of surrender. So to begin my day with a posture of surrender. Now, it's remarkable how many times I need to come back to that as I go through the day, right? Because while I begin that from that place of surrender, there are times, there are moments where I was like, all right, here's another opportunity, and I need to bring it back to that place of surrender. So there is a daily, and I love this line I heard, maybe a paraphrase of Bonhoeffer, but the beginning of the day belongs to the Lord of the day. And I just thought about that because I thought how oftentimes I've lived as though I'm the Lord of my day, and therefore I don't sort of come to the Lord at the beginning of the day. And so just this simple practice of kneeling prayer, first thing when I get out of bed,
love that.
Kind of sets the tone, but then looking for those opportunities as the day progresses to say, all right, here we are again, coming back to this place of surrender.
So I wake up every morning and wave a white flag of I just want to throw in my routine every morning of how I surrender. I did want to ask that kind of because I didn't put this in the notes, and you might not have anything else to add to this, but if somebody's listening saying, I am a warrior, like, I hear what you're saying, like, surrender and Romans 8:28, like I hear all this stuff. What's the what is a practical thing, or what is a takeaway for them listening of kind of a first step into surrender for them and saying, all right, I can do this to help me start surrendering, and I don't want to say work on my worrying, but do you have anything else, or no, I'm just kind of like tossing out there?
Yeah, I mean, some of what we already said. So I love the kneeling prayer, but even doing that before my phone. So I don't even keep my phone in my bedroom, because I know if it's in my bedroom, that's the first thing I'm going to reach for. So spending that time with the Lord first. I'm not saying it has to be an hour. It could just be a few minutes or not long at all, but starting your day from that perspective, that helps center me. And because I've even seen just in the past couple of weeks, when I don't have that, how I use the word discombobulated I feel, because I'm just all over the place. And so centering myself on Jesus through prayer, through spending a few moments with him. For me, the other practice that I've found helpful in lots of different areas, but also with surrender, is what can I be grateful for? Because often in those difficult situations where I'm struggling to surrender, I don't see the good things that are happening. And it's really hard to see some of those things. And so what is God doing that I can thank him for? So I write down 3 things that I'm grateful for every morning. And that's been a very simple but helpful practice for me to remind myself, God is at work. And a lot of times I don't see it, but here are some simple ways I do see it. So I think those are 2 ways. And then the third thing is really to think about what is going on inside of me. What am I? And this is something I do every morning, because again, like I wake up every morning and there are things that I need to surrender, that I'm holding on to, that I'm concerned about. And so thinking about what are those things that are ahead of me today or that are weighing me down, that again, I need to just open up my hands and give to the Lord. And so those are just some simple practices.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we were talking about how worry so much exists in our minds.
Yeah.
And that I think in some ways responding to that is very much something we do with our bodies.
Yes,
right? That this practice of kneeling prayer, because we can pray in our minds or just with our mouths or in our heads, but rather adopting a posture of kneeling is actually really significant, I think, in terms of responding. I think that you've made the gesture several times here, just opening your hands, and I find myself doing that quite often in this beginning from a place of surrender that is just a physical way of offering that to God, and sometimes even just imagining what it is that I'm trying to surrender, in my hands. I think that, breathing and that, people outside the faith community recognize that deep breathing is part of the way in which you can respond to when you're feeling that anxiety in your body, that this is a way to calm yourself. Well, this is part of the way that God has wired us, designed us. And so I, for years, have used a little breath prayer, especially in those moments where I'm feeling anxious. That is something I learned from Brennan Manning years ago, that just as a simple breath prayer, Abba, I belong to you. And so with the rhythm of my deep breathing, on the inhale, Abba, on the exhale, I belong to you. And just using that over and over as a way of sort of grounding myself in the reality of that identity and the reality of God's presence. Father, Abba, I belong to you. And then I love that you mentioned that practice of gratitude, because I think the regular practice of gratitude is a really important way. And Sissy and I both have a journal that we use that kind of sets some of that up for us, that begins each day with, not a shared journal, but it's the same kind of journal. But it's
Barry
funny that you mentioned it.
It's an Evernote.
So today in my journal, when I began the day with, what are you grateful for today? And just laying some things out, I wrote Isaac Harris and your place on our team, and your place in this podcast. And you were just on my mind this morning as part of what, when I think about gratitude to God, you're the first thing that I wrote down in my journal this morning about.
I was literally going to make a joke to Sissy. I'm like, Sissy, did you write my name for like what you're grateful for?
I didn't write either of your names.
And Barry actually did.
Sissy comes into my journal of gratitude quite often when I came back from sabbatical, Brian and Sissy especially, but today I was thinking about my gratitude to you.
I did write podcast. That was one of mine.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. The Well, now I can't even make a joke now.
You can't look at that. You can't make a joke.
You had this quote yesterday or a few days ago in your message about the human soul and the weight of outcomes. And because a lot of times we're worrying about an outcome that we don't have control over.
Yeah.
And it's about how the human soul, it can't bear that weight.
Yeah.
Could you explain
the human
that?
soul, Dallas Willard says, the human soul is not made to bear the weight of outcomes. And so it's just this reality that I can't make this come out right. I can't make this come out the way that I want it, regardless of what the it is. Now, that doesn't mean pure passivity. Right? It doesn't mean, it means what is mine to do and what is mine to surrender to God, to trust in God. A friend, a coach that I've been working with over the last several months, just put it to me with this very straightforward, simple question: Barry, what is yours to steward and what is yours to surrender? And I'd spent some time, processing my journal, things that were right there in front of me. What is mine to steward, right? That I have agency over, that I have that I need to do, and what is mine to surrender? And I was thinking about just even a very practical sort of, I think, fairly clear, straightforward example of this. As a senior pastor, I think a lot about and tend to worry a lot about the church's finances, right? So practice of surrender could be, well, it's out of my control, can't do anything about it. God, it's all up to you. And yet I can actually wind up abdicating responsibility of what is mine to steward. And so there are things that I can do, that I need to do to be proactive, to be problem solving. But the thing is that what's my first impulse? Is my first impulse to strategize or to pray, right? And then how am I responding? Am I doing what is mine to do? And yet ultimately, am I allowing this to sort of, especially towards the end of the year, it's like this sort of dark cloud that kind of follows me around. And that being mindful of that is just, again, the opportunity to continue to bring it back to God and practice surrender, to steward what is mine to steward and to surrender what is mine to surrender. And I think that you could think about whatever it is that you're worried about, your marriage, your kids, your job, your whatever. There are things that are yours to steward. What is mine to steward? And Lord, help me steward it well. Help me to give my all to this, to do what is in me to do. And then to trust you with the outcomes. Because if I cling to that sense that I control the outcomes, it becomes overwhelming. It's a weight that the human soul is not made to bear.
One of the things that I've found helpful, just even thinking about worry and anxiety, a practice that I try to do is, what's true about this situation? And it's related to a little bit of that stewarding and surrender. Because often what I am anxious about hasn't even happened, right? It's a perceived threat or danger. And so thinking about, okay, what is actually true? Living in the what is instead of the what if. Because that's where I get stuck. It's like all these things could happen or go wrong. They actually haven't even happened yet. And so
I'm the king of what ifs.
Right. And that can be paralyzing. Because I'm really good at thinking like of 100 scenarios of how all of this could go bad. But what if I lived in the what is? What is true about God? And really trusting in the character of God instead of living in the what ifs. That's been helpful to me.
Has there been, I know, Barry, you've mentioned recently about IBC and coming out of sabbatical.
Sure.
Sissy, has there been a time in life that you're like, man, that was a time that I was leading through worry, but then you kind of shifted that and you surrendered that part of your life or that stage of your life?
I think that's an almost daily experience for me. I mean, right now, the first thing I thought of with that question was my family, my parents, and particularly my mom and some of the health issues she's going through. So I can tend to, and there's some of this that's necessary of like, what is the next step in her care and her medical care and all of that. That's good. But I can, again, tend to worry about this is all the things that are going wrong and really focus on that and think about how can I control it, which it's completely out of my control. And that can feel really debilitating and disheartening. And what I'm trying to do now is I recognize I don't have control over that. And you know what? The Lord cares for her more than I ever could. So I'm gonna trust him in that place. But that is a almost daily practice that I have to do, because every morning I wake up and that's still a thing that I'm scared about. I'm anxious about. How is this going to turn out? What are we going to do? But then how do I once again surrender her to the Lord, knowing that he cares for her? He really does love her more than I can love her. So isn't he worthy of my trust in that situation?
It's good. Yeah, I think about outside of the context of work and leadership, family is oftentimes one of these big areas. And each of my 3 kids are kind of at pivotal moments in their own life and journey, significant kind of things happening. And that is what brings me back to that. What's mine to steward and what's mine to surrender? Because I can find myself failing to steward what is mine to steward, which just generates all the more of that sense of worry and anxiety. Am I doing all that I need to do as a father in their lives? And am I entrusting them to the care of God? This prayer from Richard Foster that I've been using, a prayer of surrender. I give into your care my family, my friends, my future. Care for them with a care that I can never give. And it's just a wonderful reminder that God cares for these people that I care so deeply about, and entrusting them to his care. So am I doing what is mine to do? And am I trusting God to do what is his to do?
That's really good. We should put that prayer in the show notes.
Yeah, we should. Yeah. And if you're at IBC, I think we're going to try to get that on social media pretty really soon. Guys, thank you for this conversation. I'll leave. We'll wrap this up before banter, just with the quote from the very beginning. Willard says, "Whatever you continue to worry about is the clearest indication of what you have yet to surrender to God." Okay. At the end of each episode, we try to have some banter, have some fun with it. A few weeks ago, there was a clip of a mega pastor that was circulating on social media, and he basically got pretty frustrated with his people about showing up late and leaving early to the church service. And I saw the clip, I feel like 100 times now, because people just shared it, offering opinions about it. And so I kind of half jokingly threw it to you. I'm like, hey, what if we shared our pet peeves about the church? Thinking that I'm like, oh, they're probably not going to want to touch this. Barry's Barry lit up.
Let's go.
Let's talk about it.
He pulled out a different journal.
I imagine that guy didn't think that clip was going to go viral the way that it did. It has been all over the place. And part of it is because I think that his response just got a little bit off track, right? A legitimate concern that he then winds up sort of barking at the people of his church in ways that just feel a little bit kind of demeaning. And the reality is that even in parenting, shame isn't the way you actually motivate people to change, right? And so it does come across a little bit like I'm going to wag my finger at you in hopes that you'll. But what he was addressing is the tendency of people to come late into worship and then to leave early from worship. And there's a good reason why that is frustrating for pastors, especially. Now, I think part of what you have to be really aware of as a pastor is, am I feeling this sense of frustration about this reality more in terms of my own ego, right? Because people come late. Do they not care about what we're doing? Is it somehow a reflection on me or leaving early? And so how easy it is for our ego to get wrapped up in that. And yet part of what I know, the burden that I and Sissy and people on our worship staff feel around this is just recognizing we've designed something that is a cohesive experience that is for you, and we want you to experience all that there is to experience from this, all that God has for you in this. And so there's that sort of legitimate desire, don't miss what's here for you. And then there's the way in which ego can get sort of twisted up and all that. I feel the same way. I think even about we oftentimes have a whole bunch of people back in the back of the room and then a lot more empty seats down front. And I'm like, come down front. And I have to recognize part of that is I truly believe as a preacher, you're going to have a better experience in worship and in hearing the sermon if you're down close and you're in tight. And I'm going to be better as a communicator feeding off the energy of the room when you're down close and in tight.
Maybe you spit on people.
Well, there is a problem. There is a spit zone. And so thankfully we have that wide moat. But right, so there's the legitimate part of that. You'll have a better experience in worship and in the sermon. And we who are trying to lead you in that way are more energized by your presence. And then there's the opposite, which is sort of the ego side of it, is like, I feel better when you're engaged and you're closely, right?
Yeah.
And so it can be, and so I think we just always have to be kind of mindful of the ways in which there are those legitimate things about come late, leave early, sit down closer, in tighter, and then the ways in which that can sort of get hijacked by our egos. So
yeah, that was one of mine. The wanting to sit in the back, and I get it, but I don't think people
get off us. I love sitting in the back.
Yeah,
row.
you do that in all staff meetings.
Yeah. We are going to shame you about that. So
when Barry's barking at us at all staff.
Well, I think people, and I didn't fully understand this until much later. I think people really don't understand how much of that worship experience is this interaction that we're doing it together. Right. It's not just from the stage, the preacher or the worship leader, whoever it is. And so that's why we want you in the front. And there is a spit-free zone, so we're okay.
That's right.
So that was one of mine. The other one of mine is, and some of this could be very much like, I understand this could happen.
I'm ready.
But when people fall asleep, that's hard. So it could be like a medical, like maybe you took medication and like, I get it. But a lot of times I'm like, is that, and again, this is part of ego. Right. Like, is it me? Is it a result of my preaching or have we made it too comfortable?
So years ago when I was teaching a class at the seminary, it was being recorded as a video course, and it was a relatively small group, and the cameras actually panned around the room. And I had this kid, I shouldn't call him a kid, a young man who would come in and he sat kind of right in the middle and he would fall asleep every day. And it's like on camera. And I'm so frustrated. I'm like, I'm not that professor who puts people to sleep. And so, but apparently I am.
He fell asleep. Yeah.
There's also the thing of like, just anytime somebody gets up to leave, again, it can be altogether legitimate. They, have an issue with their kid. They had to go to the bathroom, whatever it is. But inevitably, there's this whole thing that's going on in your head while you're up there preaching in front of everybody. And it's like, what did I say? Right. So, yeah.
So what you're saying is if somebody gets up in the middle of your message, you see them every time and you know who
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And I'm thinking they're leaving because of something I did.
What did I say? What did I say? So, okay. So one of mine's a little pet peeve. It's not a big pet peeve. But I've never been a big fan of amen as a question, right? Amen. Amen. You're looking for that audible, good. And so that's just kind of not my,
so when the preacher does that, that's what you mean.
Yeah. And I sometimes do it, right? So even though it is one of my minor pet peeves, I sometimes do it. But what's funny about that is that, and I'm nervous to share this, but it actually is connected to my mother's pet peeve about my preaching. I'm nervous to say it because now it may become everybody's pet peeve, because in my effort to avoid amen as a question, I use the rhetorical right. Right?
Yeah.
Right? So I'm up there preaching and I'm wanting to see you tracking with what I'm saying. So I'll use right as a question and I don't realize how often I do it. And so if ever I get any sort of critique from my mother, who's a member of our congregation, it's about how frequently I use the rhetorical right. And she mentioned it to me a few months back now, and about one sermon in particular. And I was livid because I was determined I did not do that. I didn't do it as often as you thought that I did. And then I went back and listened, and sure enough, boy, I used it way too much. So it's one of those things that I'm not going to get rid of and purge from my preaching, but I try to be mindful of the fact that I use the rhetorical right.
Now that you bring it up, I'm like, oh, I guess you do that.
Yeah, that's why I was nervous, is now it's going to bug everybody. It's not just going to bug my mom,
just Grancy,
but it's going to bug everybody.
I got to track that now. I mean, you did say this past week, hey, you need to join this ministry or die. So,
which was great.
I'm interested to see how signups are going.
That's right.
All right. Can I share a few?
Yeah.
Flip-flops. Can we just ban them all? Flip-flops in general.
Like toes.
No, I don't need to see your feet.
You don't like feet. Yeah.
I don't, unless we're doing like a washing of the feet thing.
You don't
flip-flops in general, church or not, just kick them, blast them all to the sun.
Yeah.
eating full breakfast in service. Like
Yeah.
bringing like a McGriddle from
Right,
McDonald's and sitting on like the second to back row.
Yeah.
And you're just like, you're
going
trying to
at
be like quiet, but like I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Like just starve until
Yeah.
it's over.
Right.
But okay, my serious pet peeve though is when people leave the church because they hear something they disagree with. This is one of my biggest pet peeves because I'm like, it's in the discomfort that I think you see the growth the most. In the moment that I know somebody who bounces from a church, whether I'm not even talking about us, who leaves a church just because somebody said something that they disagreed with or they're uncomfortable with one Sunday.
Yeah.
And then they're looking for another church. I'm like, but that's not what church we're supposed to grow. Like that's not what church is. Like it's not just supposed to be spoon fed to you in this like perfect gourmet, like everything every time. And I don't know, not to end the podcast, I don't know, but that's just.
Yeah. Well, and I've had multiple really great conversations with people who did get frustrated by something I said in a sermon, but who actually then like reached out and like, I need to talk with you about that.
That's good.
And we sit down, we have coffee, and it winds up being this really helpful, mutually helpful kind of conversation. I can think about, multiple of those through the years because I managed to make people mad a lot, apparently. No, not too bad. But I've had a lot of those kinds of conversations along the way that I think have been really helpful. And yet sometimes what happens is like, I hear something, I don't like it, I'm out.
Yeah.
And maybe that's actually that opportunity in the discomfort for me to stretch and grow and learn something new. And maybe it's also an opportunity to kind of offer a challenge or a critique that actually helps the preacher or the pastor grow and get better.
Yeah.
Unless you're listening to this podcast and you wear flip-flops.
You feel uncomfortable.
Or if you don't like the amount of times that I use the rhetorical right, that's not a good reason to leave the church.
I'm not going to forget that. So this Sunday, that's all I'm going to be watching.
I should not have ever mentioned this. This is going to come back to haunt me.
It is.
All right. Thank you so much for another week of Form. We'll be back next Thursday. Peace out. Thumbs up for Carolina.